The Health Zone, a health show which airs on Channels Television, has hosted a healthcare roundtable to commemorate the World Malaria Day. The emphasis of the meeting, which was co-hosted by St. Nicholas Hospital, was to review Nigeria's scorecard in the fight to reduce the incidence and improve treatment of malaria and what needs to be done to escalate response to malaria in the future. Our correspondent Mary Alale Yusuf reports.
The World Health Organization says 57 countries achieved reductions of at least 75% in new malaria cases between 2000 and 2015. In spite of promising statistics, the numbers of new cases and deaths from malaria in Nigeria show that progress is not quick enough. This malaria roundtable, chaired by Dr. Pt.3, highlights the challenges.
There are, if you like, fundamental and structural systemic issues causing where we are today in terms of malaria. One is around limited data.
Our health workers are very resistant to change. Some people will not follow policy, they will not follow this. So they will tell, I've been treating malaria for long, why are you telling me this? So these are the issues. Then our people again, what's called a health-seeking behavior, whatever it is. These are other issues, the major challenges.
Experts here, however, insist that the fight must continue with current strategies such as insecticide-treated nets, larviciding, and preventive treatment for pregnant women. They also emphasize the importance of evidence-based treatment.
When you come to the rapid diagnostic test, it's a highly sensitive test. It's a highly specific test, which means that if it's sensitive, it means that most of the time, when it is malaria, it will tell you that it's malaria.
No doctor, no matter how good you are, can make a diagnosis of malaria without the test.
All participants agree that the huge cost of the malaria management plan could be an impediment to achieving the desired results in malaria treatment, prevention, and eradication, but admit that private sector involvement could be the answer to the funding gap.
We have seen some improvement, but it does not match our aspirations as a country or our need. And so bold, disruptive innovations, as well as complementary public-private partnerships are required to at least allow us to go faster.
Would the interventions Nigeria has at the moment be enough to achieve sustainable goals?
I think we should do the basic things first. And even just doing the basic things and doing them right, making sure that we establish the diagnosis, making sure that we treat appropriately, making sure that we identify other things that can mimic malaria and treat those.
From the discussions that have taken place, it seems that if issues of education of both patient and practitioner are addressed, with a healthy dose of public and private sector cooperation, Nigeria could get much closer to the zero malaria case goal much faster. Mary Alale Yusuf, Channels Television News.
As the world commemorates the World Malaria Day, the U.S. Ambassador to Nigeria, James Entwistle, says that the country has made historic progress in turning the tide against malaria in the past 15 years. In a statement issued from the Public Affairs section of the United States diplomatic mission to Nigeria, Ambassador Entwistle says that since 2011, an aggressive program to fight malaria in Nigeria reduced mortality rates amongst children under 5 by 18%, and malaria amongst this same group, of course, declined by a remarkable 15%. The ambassador adds that the United States remains strongly committed to working with Nigeria and all her partners to intensify the efforts to free people from the tremendous burden of malaria. The United States says that it also supports Nigeria by training medical personnel and community health workers to care for people with malaria. Well, the pediatrician now joins me on the news at 10, Dr. Toju Chikiobi, to look at the efforts to combat malaria in Nigeria and indeed sub-Saharan Africa. I want to thank you so much indeed for coming on the news at 10. Let's begin with Nigeria. One of the strategies, as we heard in that report, of management is testing before treatment. Doesn't that suggest to you that the burden may be just treatment and then, or is the treatment being targeted, do you think?
The burden is not just the treatment. We are in sub-Saharan Africa, And so there are many diseases that mimic malaria in symptomatology. All we're saying is that we test, confirm that the patient indeed has malaria, and then treat. Treating empirically, presumptively assuming the fever is malaria, is what is responsible for drug resistance to a drug that was used for over 50 years successfully to combat falciparum malaria, which is chloroquine. It is no longer effective because of the lack of judicious use of antimalarials. So the point of testing before treatment is actually to help us better manage malaria, because when we test and we know it's malaria, then we can treat appropriately and then direct resources at finding out what the other causes of the fever is and treat those appropriately as well.
So are there new measures being introduced to try to combat resistive malaria?
There are no new measures except what we're talking about, which is test before treat. Because right now, the only line of drugs we have for use is ACT, which is the artemisinin combination therapy. That's the only thing that's working right now against malaria, falciparum malaria. And so if we continue to treat every fever as though it is malaria and use these ACT drugs, in a very short while, we will begin to see resistance, which we actually have begun to see in parts of the world against these ACT drugs. And that's our last line of defense against treating malaria.
So how do we combat malaria across sub-Saharan Africa? Nigeria case study 1, but you have that largely in sub-Saharan Africa, and it is thought to be the part of the poorest in the whole of Africa. What do you suggest?
I believe we have to address it as a multi-pronged approach. An approach has to focus on the public, on public education, health education, empowering people by giving them knowledge as to what causes malaria, how it is transmitted, and what they can do to prevent it. So making sure the environments are clean, uncluttered, so there are no containers and empty receptacles that can collect water that gets stagnant and acts as a breeding source for the mosquito. So we have to educate the public, educate them that every fever is not malaria. So when you are ill with fever, go and get tested first before you treat, particularly with young children, for which malaria can rapidly progress to very, very severe illness and death, and also pregnant women. So I think the public health education is one. Then dealing with the environment, as we heard on the different reports that indoor residual spraying and larvicide treatment is what works, particularly indoor residual spraying. But as in our forum this morning, Dr. Jide Idris, the Commissioner for Health, talked about, it's a very expensive venture. And so Lagos State, for example, is focusing on larvicide. Either case, it's environmental control of the vector, which is the mosquito. That's the other aspect. Another important aspect is, of course, government, is the will to follow through on sustainable solutions, not pick and, and by follow through, what I mean is funding, because all of these interventions cost money, and we need follow through to achieve zero malaria cases in Nigeria.
Very insightful. Many thanks indeed, Dr. Tochu Chikeobi, a pediatrician, for talking to us on this World Malaria Day here on the News at 10. Investigation into the clash between the Nigerian army and members of the Islamic movement in Nigeria is ongoing, but there are conflicting figures being presented over the number of those allegedly killed in the incident between Amnesty International and the army. Amnesty and members of the Islamic movement are insisting that 347 corpses were buried in the mass graves. However, the medical officer from the Nigerian Army Medical Unit is saying that only a few corpses were handed over to the representatives of the state government. Well, quickly switching gears now as we get set for business news on the News at 10 with Adishawa Josh.
You first. First Bank.
Welcome to Business News. Over 140 entrepreneurs are set to join select business leaders at the upcoming Katsina State Economic and Investment Summit next month. According to the chairman of the organizing committee, Mr. Ibrahim Jikamshi, entrepreneurs in the state are looking to partner for expansion and technical support. Mr. Jukashi says the summit stands to help quench this thirst, mainly in the agriculture value chain. Nigeria's 4 state refineries will require a new line of investment totaling $700 million for their complete turnaround. This is according to the NNPC Group Managing Director, Dr. Ibe Kachuku. But speaking on Channel's television Business Morning program on Monday, the head of energy research at Eco Bank Group, Mr. Dolapo Oni, believes the options open to the NNPC at sourcing the $700 million are few in view of the state of the global oil industry. One of the most possible investment window proposed by Mr. Oni was for the National Oil Corporation to proceed with the plan to allow investors set up new co-location refining facilities within the existing refineries. Nigeria's 4 refineries are old and had undergone turnaround several times but unable to meet optimal performance set by the government. The International Monetary Fund says Middle East oil-producing economies face up to $150 billion in income losses in 2016 due to cheap crude oil prices. In a statement published on Monday, the IMF says oil-dependent economies in the Middle East missed out on $390 billion in oil revenues last year. Lower oil revenues had come from a steady oil prices decline, raising budget deficits of major oil producers such as Saudi Arabia and Kuwait to new levels. The IMF Middle East and Central Asia Director Masood Ahmed says probably 4 and 5 years of action will be needed on both spending and revenues before a number of countries reach comfortable fiscal situation. Now, over 30 billion naira was lost at the stock market on Monday as a mixed sentiment prevailed in the key sectors of the market. Here's Bolaji Akinwale with a summary of the activities.
Hello and welcome to the Stock Market Report. The market opened for the week on a downside as investors take profit at the local bourse. The all-share index shed 0.34%, closing at 24,765.10. The market's capitalization closed at 8.5 trillion naira. Turnover volume stood at 144.6 million shares, valued at 766 million naira, and traded in 2,729 deals. On the gainers table, Land Africa tops, leading by 4.94%. CCNN and Union Daikon edge up by 4.93% and 4.89% each. On the decliners chart, Fort Oil drops 9.13%, coming ahead of Air Service and Portland Paints. On the top trades chart, bank stocks led by Axis Bank, Guaranty Trust Bank and Sky Bank were the highest volume drivers for the day. And that's it on the Stock Market Report. I am Bolaji Akinwale.
Thanks a lot, Bolaji. Let's now take a look at figures from other exchanges around the world. That's Business News Tonight. The News at 10 continues in a moment. I am Adeshewa Josh.
You first. First Bank.
Still ahead on the News at 10, Rafael Nadal sues French ex-minister Roselyne Bachelot over doping comments. Stay with us.